Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this, our third keynote lecture, the 1858 Charter Lecture for 2019. I'm Mary Stiasny. I'm one of the Pro-Vice Chancellors of the University of London, and as I said, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here. But before we go any further, I just have to do some housekeeping notices. The fire exits are there, 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 and there. Got that? And the toilets are out there. We are not expecting a fire alarm drill this evening. So if there is a fire alarm, if it carries on after 15 seconds, we go. And we'll go out of one of the exits. Okay? So those are the domestic notices for everybody. And let me welcome you again to the Charter Lecture. Those of you familiar with the University of London will know that it was this charter, the 1858 Charter, that was awarded to the university by Queen Victoria, and it opened up education to the world. And to this day, we continue with our mission to provide access to quality higher education for students who are able to benefit. And we offer such flexibility that we've even recently had a student taking examinations in Antarctica. It was kind of difficult to get the papers there, but we did. But today is about adding further value to the learning experience of our 50,000 students in 180 countries, who I hope will be having access to tonight's lecture, either by live streaming, we are live streaming this event, or later on YouTube. It'll be available on YouTube. I'm also thankful to Dr Rolph Payet, who has a long association with the University of London, for agreeing to give tonight's keynote lecture, Pushing Back on Plastics. We know that Dr. Payet's contribution as an environmentalist has been invaluable. As a lead author with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose reports led to the sharing of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 with Al Gore, we know that Dr. Payet's commitment to make the world a better place for all of us has never wavered. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him for his immense contribution to this field. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand you over now to Dr. Payet, Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, each of which share the common objective of protecting human health and the environment from hazardous chemicals and waste. Dr. Payet, please.
Thank you very much, Mary, and a wonderful welcome to you all this evening to this 1858 Charter Lecture. And of course, it's an honor for me to present to you some of my perspectives and thinking on the issue of plastics. Before I begin, I just wanted to share with you a photo here. And when many people look at this photo, and if it was a tourism kind of photo where you want to take a holiday, you probably never go there for a holiday, right? Because it's simply horrible. But when you also look at this photo, you see a failure of us as humans to be able to deal with our own waste. But we also see an opportunity here. Some governments scratch their heads, some governments turn away from the problem, they leave it as it is. Some people just walk by it every day and they forget about it, or they pretend to forget about it. And so much so that today we have a large garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. We have millions of tons of plastics which continue to go into the ocean. And I will go into some detail into where this plastic is going. Now, you think it stops in the ocean. It doesn't stop in the ocean at all. First, let's start with a song. I don't know whether many of you were born during that time, but this was quite a popular song. And this is basically what we know about plastics. Plastics are very flexible. You can bend it, make it, mold it. Today you have plastic wood, plastic tiles, plastic everything. You can really turn any kind of object or any kind of natural product into looking like plastics. And I just wanted to share with you this beautiful song that came out in 1996. Now we have a challenge before us, and the challenge is not one that can be solved by one person, one discipline or even one matter of research. It's a subject that is so complex, and I'll try to tease them out this evening, that we need to bring everybody together, all the sciences together. Plastics is a cultural issue, and not many people seem to appreciate that we cannot seem to change. And I've been in a government, my own government in Seychelles before, where I was minister. And when we decided to look at plastics, there was always concerns about how people will react. People will be unhappy. We are changing their lives overnight. They will not be able to do this, to do that. But I haven't seen or heard any deaths from countries that have banned plastics as a result of the banning of plastics. So, but the cultural impact of the whole change of our habits is very powerful, and that creates a lot of challenges when governments try to implement changes in our behavior. But I won't spend much time on behavioral aspects today, but I will focus a bit on the chemistry of plastics, because I think some of us take it for granted that this plastic is the same as this plastic. This lining there, which is a plastic, is the same as all the other plastics. They're not the same at all. They are very, very different. And since plastics was invented, over 60, 70 years ago, we've evolved into making all sorts of variations and products out of plastics. Second aspect I want to look at is our planet. And what is plastics doing to our planet and us, because we live on the planet as well. Third is to look at the economics of plastics, to see whether we can start teasing out solutions that can help us address the challenge we have before us. And finally, look at the legal aspects, because we need, in my view, a legal framework if we are to move forward and measure the progress there that we are making in addressing the issue of plastic. So let's start with the first Chem 101. Now, plastics is in nature, believe it or not. Cotton, they are all polymers. Okay, it's a natural plastic. We don't call it plastic, obviously, but it is the same basic component. They are made of repeating units. So one unit, and you add it all together, you form a chain, and that gives you the kind of product that you can do all sorts of things with it. You can add things in between, you can add things to it, but at the end of the day, they are repeating units. And this is cellulose, which is found in plants. So plastics can be both natural and man-made. I'm sure not many of you were aware of this. Plastics are, as I said, long chains of polymers. Plastics, therefore, are very versatile. You can make them hard, you can make them soft, you can make them semi-liquid, you can make them last for a very long time, you can make them resistant to certain, like to the sun, so that it doesn't break down very fast. You can weave them. It's unbelievable what you can do with those types of polymers. And of course, plastics also have lifetimes, some longer lifetimes, some shorter lifetimes. And of course, then comes the conclusion. Plastics can be recycled. Plastics can be turned into other things. Plastics can be turned into other types of plastics. And these, for me, are very important concepts to understand when we're discussing plastics. And I just wanted to introduce this slide here. One important thing that we forget about plastics is the additives. And this is very, very important, because we add additives to plastics to give it those different properties. And many of you have seen the new 5 pound note. It's plastic. Did you know that? It's plastic. And in there you have all the security features embedded in that plastic. So you shine a light through that, and it gives you, it's actually trying to catch up with counterfeiting, equipment like photocopiers and all the other stuff. So your new banknotes are actually made out of plastic. I've got a 10 pound note here. But it facilitates processing, which means that you can make plastic products very fast by adding additives to that. It also reduces the cost of production. Coloring for attractiveness, like I mentioned before. Clothing, tiles, materials, you can add coloring to that. For a long time, they've been trying to combine metal with plastics. They've been able to do that now. So you have all these metallic colors and shades and all this. It's cheaper to wood, obviously, metal, because currently plastics come from hydrocarbons, so it's easier to extract from there. And of course, the big issue with that is poor people can have access to furniture and other things, because a plastic chair is a lot cheaper, as you probably know, than a hardwood chair, right? So these are some basic also issues to take into consideration. And of course, they are very safe under normal use. Plastics are extremely safe. They are used in medical, in operations, in surgical operations. They are very important in hospitals for stopping contamination or infections. They're important, as you know, in food production, so that we can keep food longer on the shelves and all this. They are also safe, extremely versatile, as I mentioned before. They're designed to last, so you can design the plastic to last, whether under the sea, in different kinds of exposure to different kinds of forces in the environment. And of course, some argue that it is environmentally friendly. And if you think about it, yes, because you are using a plastic chair, not using a wooden chair. I'm not subscribing that I agree with this argument, but they're saving a tree and using a plastic chair. But I'm just giving you the extent of the arguments that we've used in our dependence on plastics. If you look at the far left of the slide, I've put in some chemicals that we add in those additives. And these are just 3 examples. There are many more. These chemicals have been found to be really toxic, which means that they survive a long time in the environment. They build up in our body, can create cancers, health issues, and all this. And these 3 chemicals are now listed under the Stockholm Convention. So that means they've been banned. I mean, in a few years, we should not have these chemicals on our planet because they've been found to be really toxic. But they are used in plastics, and they are embedded in the plastic. So once you recycle the plastic, if you don't remove those, which is quite difficult once you blended them together, then you will actually keep those chemicals in the plastic. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So that brings me to one of the conventions I'm responsible for, and that's the Stockholm Convention. Am I okay? I'm walking too much? I stay there, okay. All right, I have to, okay. So POPs, or persistent organic chemicals, the 3 ones that I showed you, are chemicals that, first, persistent, that means they stay in the environment for long periods of time, some 100 years, some 30 years, and they are designed that way. They bioaccumulate, which means that they build up in your body. And since we are on top of the food web, everything builds up in our body, right? We eat everything. Nobody eats us. So at the end of the day, all the chemicals and contaminants stay in our body, especially in our fatty tissue. Some is excreted with our hair, but it really kind of builds up in our body. And the third one is long-range transport. And I don't know how much you've heard about chemicals like DDT. They found it in whales. They found it in the Arctic. Now, how would a whale get DDT? He's not been on a farm. But because they used DDT on the farm, so the DDT went into the rivers, into the ocean, and it picked up by the whales because they eat a lot of krill and all these species in the ocean. So we've seen that these chemicals travel long distances. And we're seeing the same pattern with plastics. They're not in the chemical constituents yet, but they are traveling as well. And on the Stockholm Convention, we have 183 parties, which means that it's almost all countries of the world are parties to those conventions. And I've given you this evening 3 chemicals that are found as additives in plastics. And these are where they're found. They are found in flame retardants, for example, in polystyrene foams. Polystyrene foams are used to insulate our houses, our homes. Big, thick foams. Okay, there's alternatives now, but most of the homes that were built maybe 5-10 years ago have got this in them. The problem is they are now sitting happily in those foams. But the problem is you break down the house and you just dump the foam because there's no label on there that says this has got this and that additive. Then this will leach into the environment and then accumulate and into our body. You see what I'm getting at? So these chemicals are currently in the plastics that we have now. Some of them maybe not in the plastic bag that we buy in the shops, but they are in construction. Short chain chlorinated paraffins, SCCP, these are used in, also has in PVC, in piping. So again, when we remove those, they will have an issue to deal with. And the third one that I've given you is PBDEs. These are flame retardants in plastics, textiles, and electronics. And these will probably be found in clothing, in furniture. You know, and this morning I had a meeting in WMO, we were discussing in ships. And something we didn't think about is in ships, they also have flame retardants for, not the hull is made out of metal and all this, but the whole, you know, cabins and everything, cruise ships and all these massive ships. They have all these components in there. And when it comes to ship dismantling, they go to Bangladesh, to India, and the people take it apart. They take the metal because it's got value, they take the electricals, and they leave everything else. It's cut into pieces and chucked into the sea, or it's chucked into the mangroves. So you can see the challenges that we have before us. So it's not only plastic bags. Plastic bags are the low-hanging fruits. Let's get rid of them. But we have some serious issues with plastics that we have to deal with. And I wanted you to reflect on this evening. And this is a particular chemical environment. Sorry for the slide, which is not very clear here, but it just shows you the pathways of this particular additive which is added to plastic when it goes into the environment. So it goes into the sediments, accumulates in the sediments, and picked up by different organisms. And here you can see it also comes from sewage. Now sewage, yes, you might not think there's plastics in sewage. There is. Okay? And it's lots of it because the sewage is, even though it's treated, the plastics doesn't get treated. The microplastics and those chemicals don't actually get treated right now. And they end up in the ocean. And here you can see from this graphic down there, it accumulates in the fish we eat. And probably you are thinking, let me see, you are thinking that because you eat meat and vegetables, you don't eat fish. I eat a lot of fish, that you are exempt. I'll share with you some. Where's the slide? Where did it go? In fact, yes, maybe it will come later. So in terms of the chemistry, before I move on to the next subjects, we then cannot simply think of just recycling plastics like we've done before. Put all the plastics together and make flower pots and make benches and make flooring. It's time we move away from this kind of thinking. We cannot longer, because of this, of the constituents of plastics, you see. We've assumed that plastics is plastics, but it is not. It's different types of plastics, and we need to treat them as they are before we actually decide what to do with them and turn them into flower pots or whatever and whatnot. So that's the first outcome of the discussions within the chemistry aspects of plastics. So we cannot mix all types of plastics because some plastics have got toxic chemicals, some don't have, like your PET bottle don't have. So if you mix the two together and then you recycle it into PET bottles later on, you have a problem because now your PET bottle is contaminated with toxic chemicals. Plastics with POPs or even questionable additives cannot be recycled with plastics with no POPs. Okay, that's important. Thirdly, some end-use applications require higher grade and clean recycled plastics, such as toys. And this is a big issue. Now, we're going to take recycled plastics and we're going to turn it into toys, and we're all going to be very happy this Christmas buying a toy which says made from recycled plastic. We're all going to be happy. Wow. We're going to give our kid a toy made from recycled plastic, but we don't know the source of this plastic. And these plastics, the plastics that are gone into that toy, could have contaminants in there. And there's a real danger. And that's why it's important to try and know what kind of plastics is going where. Facilities for recycling hazardous plastics is limited because it's highly specialized. So plastics, like I gave the example of foam in insulation, are very difficult to recycle. And even in Europe, there are not many facilities that can recycle those kinds of hazardous plastics. So we need to be careful then that we do not mix. The problem is, you know where the mixing happens? Guess where? In our kitchens. We take one plastic, we put it in, probably it's PET, then we put another plastic and another plastic and another plastic together. So this whole bin of plastic, which we think we are doing well in sorting out, actually can contain, if it contains one type of plastic which has got contaminants in it, and it's taken to a recycling factory, and the recycling factory mixes all together, then we've contaminated the rest of the plastic. So that's a challenge. So we also have a cultural challenge here. The other one is appropriate classification and labeling is therefore important. Now we've seen in cases where we're recycling PET, we've been able to set up systems because we clearly label, there's a little label at the bottom of each PET. If you turn it upside down, there's a little triangle with a number in the middle. That tells us exactly what is the plastic. And the recycler then can recycle that into other bottles. But unfortunately, we've only been able to have classification and labeling for plastics for very few plastic, of the thousands of different types of plastic. So an exercise to classify, label them, and be able to detect what kinds of plastics is critical. Waste management then needs to factor in segregating different types of plastics. Now, there are machines that can segregate different types of plastics. Of course, it's impossible in the home to do so, because otherwise you'll need to get a degree in chemistry. But there are machines and sensors that can detect those kinds of plastics. And that is an important development, and those machines exist today. And of course, implementation, very important from my perspective of the Stockholm Convention by countries, are very important because those countries need to put in place the laws that will require those recycling companies, those companies that are producing plastics, to be very clear and specify what their plastics contain. And if they do contain hazardous substances, that they are not mixed with I won't use the word clean plastics, but you know what I'm trying to say. Now, if you just Google, and I did this as an exercise to show you this evening, if you Google types of plastics, we get 7. But seriously, there are not 7 types of plastics, because if I go to the chemicals database now, which normally not normal people would do, is I get 145, 803 in this register here, types, okay? Variants of plastics with additives and whatever. So the challenge we have before us is not as simple as we think. Now we come to our second part, which is looking at our planet. And this is the challenge we have. And these are the top types of, I've taken it from Ocean Conservancy report, which looks at the 10 types of trash found in the world's oceans. And this gives us an idea of the different types of plastics and other types, of course, aluminum cans and glass beverage bottles we have in the world's ocean. But just on this side, we see 8 million tons of plastics being dumped into the oceans every year. And here I'm not talking only about plastics, but plastics with additives. And some of the additives, we don't know what those additives are because we have not labeled them. So we'll have to go back and analyze those products and work out what they have in them. And this is critical. How long until those plastics will disappear? Now, if we look at an apple core, 2 months. If we look at the plastic beverage holder, 400 years. Styrofoam cup, 50 years. Guys, this is way beyond our lifetime. What we're putting in the ocean here will not be even for the next generation. It'll be the next 10 generations will have to deal with this issue. So we have to start putting in place the foundations to really solve this problem now. And it will take us, not 450 years, I hope, but at least in the next 25 years, quite a lot of work and effort, both governments, industry, and us as people as well, because I mentioned before, the cultural change as well needs to happen for us to be able to address the issue of plastics. And as I said before, that's the side I was looking for. If you think it's only the people who is eating fish that will be affected by plastics being taken up by fish, think twice. There's as much plastics in the soil as you would find in the sea. Why? Because the agricultural sector has been using plastics for a long time now because they've seen the use of plastics increasing moisture, decreasing dryness, increasing moisture, protecting the plants, creating a microenvironment for the plants, tying up, little pieces of plastics to tie up the plants to stop them. I mean, these are very simple things, but there's more and more use of plastics, and plastics are in the soil. And this research here, all this is emerging research. We don't know enough. Even uptake of plastics in marine organisms, uptake of plastics in plants, we don't know enough. But we know it's happening because these observations have been made now. More studies and more research should be done, but as you can see here, it's just showing you how microplastics enter into plants, into different types of plants. So if you are just thinking of consuming anything on land and you'll be escaping the microplastic issue, don't think so. In PET bottles, now they've done a research. This group collected mineral water bottles from 9 companies and tried to find out whether there's microplastics in there. The water bottles that you buy in the shops, all of them have got microplastics in them. All of them. National Geographic did a research. I mean, as you know, National Geographic goes all over the world to places where we don't go. They climb down cliffs into waterfalls. They go into the Arctic, Antarctic. They dive into places where most of us won't go. And they've been collecting water from these places, and they found microplastics. They haven't found a body of water today which doesn't have microplastics in them. That's the seriousness of the issue we have before us. So it's not only the problem of the people eating fish and in the ocean. It is very much on our plates today, plastics. So let's look a little bit at the economic aspects of plastics. And from the chart here, you can see since the 1950s, the production of plastics have really skyrocketed, and now we are nearly way past 350 million tons of plastics. It has helped us in our development. It is in everything from our cars to our homes to buildings to infrastructure to everything that we do nowadays. Plastics is a very important component. And if we look at the top 10 exporters of plastics, and we see here from, of course, Hong Kong is the gateway for China, United States, Japan, Germany, United Kingdom is like 6th largest exporter of plastics in the world. And this is the interesting and shocking graphic, because out of this 830 million tons of plastics that are produced, only 500 million tons, you see that? 8,300, 500 million tons are recycled. This huge amount of plastics are not recycled, so they are put in landfills. Some are burnt. Incineration of plastic is also quite big, and also there it is, 700 million tons are incinerated, and the rest goes into the environment, into landfills, or end up into the ocean. So there's a great opportunity there. It's a problem, but there's a great opportunity there for us to really look. And coming from my first slide, as I shared with you, plastics can be recycled. Now, what happened? China has been the largest importer of plastic as well, plastic waste. So everybody around the world were putting their plastics on boats. And as you probably know, these plastics were not separated. They were all mixed together, and they were sent to China. And China was one of the largest recycling countries for plastic. And what happened in 2018? China banned the importation of plastics, saying that it is impacting on their country because some of the components that is sent with the plastics, they cannot recycle it, so they have to find a place to do it. They have their own stock of plastics that they want to recycle, so they cannot deal with the world's plastic anymore. So what happened is around the cities, ports around the world, the plastic started to build up. more plastics went into incineration, more plastics went into the landfill, and this is the situation that we found ourselves a year ago. And of course, under the Basel Convention, that's the other convention I'm introducing now, is the right of each and every country whether they accept waste or not. So it's a sovereign right. So whether you want to accept waste from another country, it's your right. If you ban, it's your right to ban it. Now, but in the context of our world today, since we have evolved into a globalized world where trade moves around, many of the things here are produced in China. We import those products here. It is not working because we live in a globalized world. If we didn't live in a globalized world, then maybe countries will produce their own chairs and use their own chairs and recycle their own chairs. But this is not the situation today. Chairs are produced in China or elsewhere, and it's used in another country. And when this chair breaks down, obviously, the country who used the chair, if they don't have facilities for it or it's too expensive for them to recycle, want to send it to another country where it can be recycled cost effectively. But of course, most important for the Basel Convention is in a sound environmental manner. That means the recycling of this chair does not create environmental problems. And that's the basis of the Basel Convention. So you can see here the majority of countries exports to China. So as you can see, the UK, where's the UK? Okay, you are way down the line. But as you can see, the top country there is, Japan, United States, and to Thailand. So the whole world put their arms up and say, what is happening? Why can't we export plastics to China anymore? We don't know what to do with the plastics. Why has China banned the plastics and all this? We need to think both sides of the story. I think it was a silver lining. There's a silver lining to this because we were taking everything for granted. We were carrying on with business as usual, as we're doing with climate change, as we're doing with everything else, with destruction of the oceans and the earth's resources and the forests. Because when we sit in here, we don't realize that whatever actions that we do is having an impact on the rest of the world. And that is every human's reflection that they have to take. Whenever we wake up in the morning, whatever we eat, whatever we consume, is having an impact not only within our immediate environment, but around the world. Because we are creating the market for more energy, for more fuel, for more consumption, for more products. And so China, in a way, gave us a wake-up call and said, look, guys, we need to take a step back and look at what we are doing to our planet. So that, for me, is the silver lining. Is it the end of recycling? I don't think so. Is the future of recycling? I think there's great opportunities. And we need to, and I will spend some time discussing this in a few minutes, is the opportunity for recycling today is even greater than before. But the proper recycling which is responsible, recycling which is addressing some of the challenges that I've mentioned before. So what happened? The consequences of the China ban was it created a domestic crisis in exporting countries. It increased shipment of plastic waste to other recipient countries, and this is what we've seen happening. In Indonesia, they received more containers of waste now because all the waste is going to China. So instead of the exporting country sitting down and saying, what can I learn from this? They found somewhere else to send the waste. Again, this is how we react. This is how we think. Our solution is to transfer that problem somewhere else. So in Indonesia, waste has been piling up. Philippines, Southeast Asia has been huge uproar, and as a result, Malaysia has banned, I think. Indonesia is considering banning. So at the end of the day, we're all going to ban, and we're all going to be stuck with our plastic. And this is, for me, going back in reverse, because at the end of the day, we buy a chair from another country, and we use the chair. So we are in a globalized world. So going back to being singular countries is, for me, we'll have a discussion on this, but for me, it's really, we've achieved some efficiencies through globalization. And for me, it's like going backwards. So we're going to still buy chairs from those countries, right? but we're not going to be able to develop a recycling. How are we going to develop a circular economy? A circular economy is about, turning the products that we use and making it going around into a closed loop, so to speak. I'll come to that in a minute. So the reality of things today, and also there's a transboundary movement of plastics going through our rivers, which goes into the other countries. For example, in my country, we have a huge number of islands where there's no one living on those islands. And these are islands we pick up the highest amount of waste because they just, so the waste doesn't look for boundaries really. It travels in the oceans, and as we know, it travels in the atmosphere as well. So it needs a global solution. So going to a national solution on waste is for me it's part of the solution, but not enough. We need a global approach to solving the issue of waste. And of course, increase in ocean dumping, yes, I think there would be an increase in ocean dumping because some companies, especially doing illegal waste transports, will, since China is not accepting the waste, will find somewhere in the ocean and dump it. So we need to address the issue. We cannot just shift it somewhere else. And that's the point here. And of course, as I mentioned before, there are opportunities there. So we have to put more emphasis on national responsibility for waste. It's our responsibility. It's the responsibility of my country to deal with the waste. It's the responsibility of this country to deal with the waste. And I will go as far as the responsibility of the people of this country as it is the responsibility of the people of my country to deal with waste. We are all equally have to take responsibility for our waste. And this is the message, I think, that needs to go home today. And this is what the message, the Basel Convention tried to send, and I'll come to that in a minute. We should also engage plastic producers and waste generators in finding solutions to the plastic issue. It's not only a waste issue, it's also the producers. They need to be engaged in this whole process. Thirdly, we need to stimulate modernization of recycling. Again, going back to my original premise, not all plastics are the same. So the plastics recycling or recycling industry needs to get more specialized, more sophisticated. Just like the producing companies are sophisticated, the recycling companies also need to become more sophisticated. And of course, awareness. And I think in this country we've seen tremendous awareness being raised through the media on the issue of plastics. And this has really raised the awareness. And I think now we are ready really to move forward for action. So final set of slides, looking at the legal aspects, and this is critical. If you talk to industry, and I work a lot with industry, they tell you, look, it should be voluntary, we should be allowed to engage in voluntary activities. I completely agree. But it's not enough. It's like telling your kid, yes, you can decide when you want to go to school, and maybe Monday he goes to school, and Tuesday he doesn't think he needs to go to school, and Thursday he goes to school. He's going to school, right? But it's not enough. He needs 5 days of schooling. So that's the logic. So in order to engage him, you have to just put the rule now and say, you need to go to school, right, and get your homework done. So this is a bit of an illustration I'm trying to share with you how industry should work together with governments and civil society and work together really, rather than saying that we need voluntary mechanisms. They're important, but they're not enough. If they were enough, then we wouldn't have had these millions of tons of plastics in the oceans. Everyone would have been taking responsibility. It would be a perfect world where I wouldn't have even to be here with you this evening to talk about plastic waste. We'll probably be talking about something else. So in terms of global treaty, and that comes to my basic argument, it is not a problem of one country. No longer, we've moved past this. It's a global issue. Because we source products from all over the world, we make products from all over the world, we're going to likely recycle products in different countries. No one country has all the capabilities. I'll give you a simple example. A small island state. Okay, he buys a mobile, the guy is an islander, he buys a mobile. A small island state doesn't have even the technological capacity to recycle a mobile. So you have to export the mobile somewhere else to a facility that can recycle that mobile. So since no countries are created equal and we all come together as one planet, then you need an international response. And of course, the other issue is because plastics runs into the oceans, into the atmosphere, so we're all affected by it. So that means we need an international response. So the Basel Convention then, this convention is 30 years old. And I don't know what these guys were thinking in those days. 30 years old, I just graduated from university. But they said it is our responsibility for waste. And I keep on emphasizing it this evening. It's our responsibility as countries, as people, to take care of our waste. And waste should be managed in an environmentally sound manner. What that means, it means that the waste that we manage should not have an impact on the environment and on the health. That means the natural environment and our personal health. It needs to have clear and agreed definition. And this has been one of the challenges of the Basel Convention, and I would assume each and every other treaty, is how do we define products that have been used. Now, in our culture, we've come up with the word waste, but at the end of the day, we know that this is not a waste, it is a resource. It's a secondary resource. We call it secondary materials because we can use it to be recycled. But since we've lived with waste, so now we have a challenge of trying to change this terminology of waste is not something that you throw away, but something that you can reuse. And the thing is then, how do we define something that you can reuse? One, then share it with Mary here for her to use a second time, okay, and then share it with someone else to use for a third time, and then when it comes to the end of life, then we can actually then recycle it, right? How do we define that product? And that has been a challenge for countries, for regulators, is how do we define those different stages so that we all understand the same language? Because if we all come with a different definitions, you can expect what will happen. You call this new, I call it second hand. You call it end of life, I call it third hand or something like that. So it creates a lot of confusion. And of course, when you talk about a transboundary context where customs are exchanging information, when you are shipping new products, the customs receive the container, it goes in, it checks its manifest, it says, oh, this is a mobile, this is a port, it's brand new. So it's easy. But when it becomes waste, again in inverted commas, sorry, the definitions can become quite difficult. So the Basel Convention, and I would say, has had a lot of challenges in trying to come up with those clear definitions. And now it's even more important that we actually define. And here I'm not talking about plastics, but I'm talking about electronic waste, which also can, electronic materials which can be used third, fourth time. They can be exported to one country to be used a second time, and then can be exported to a third country to be used a third time. So you can understand the levels of complexity we're trying to get into here. And we need to be able to track it. So we need to be able to track this particular Rolls Mobile has a unique number, and we need to be able to track it so that we know where it's going to go and how it's going to be recycled and all this. So we don't have such a system yet in place. We need, if we're going to talk about circular economy, if you're going to talk about recycling, you will need to be able to identify and trace this to wherever it's going to go and to wherever product is going to end up next. And that's a basic challenge that we have. Transboundary movement should be done in a transparent and environmentally sound manner. So everybody should be knowing, all countries should be knowing where that mobile comes from and what's going to be recycled into. Fundamental. The Basel Convention today has 187 countries. Again, as I mentioned in the context of Stockholm Convention, it's most countries, which means that we can do something. Because if those countries get together and agree on things, then I think we can move forward. If it was 10 countries, I'll tell you, but the rest of the 190 countries are not interested. So it'll be difficult to make something global work. But since we have 187 countries, it can be difficult, but at least we have the number of countries for which we can make concrete movement. And this is what they did. Last May, they did the amendments to the convention, and I'll come to that in a minute. We have other treaties on waste. We have a number of treaties on waste, and this is the MARPOL Annex 1, which talks about taking waste into reception facilities and not dumping it into the sea. There's been a lot of calls for a new treaty on plastics, and this has been championed by several countries. There's also UNEA, is the United Nations Environment Assembly. This is the most senior policy body in the environment within the United Nations, had come out with resolutions on plastics. We're currently now working, for example, with World Customs Organization. Like I mentioned before, if you're gonna work into trying to recycle plastics and have it cross borders, you need to know what kind of plastics. It needs to be labeled, it needs to be transparent, and this work is very important, it's critical. And of course, we have in the shadows global trade, and that is big. There's lots of money to be made, and I'm not encouraging you to engage in illegal trade today, but there's a lot of money to be made in illegal waste trade. It's one of the most lucrative illegal trades that you can have because it goes under the radar. If you are trading in drugs, in narcotics, in guns, everybody, national security, protecting the nation from drugs, so it's high on the political agenda. Trade in waste, that's the problem, right? So it goes under the radar. But there's millions of dollars which is traded in the trade in waste. And that is, of course, a big concern. And coming back to the national responsibility, we need to have the appropriate national legislation in the countries for waste management. And that's fundamental. Countries need to take waste as a priority. It is not an exciting thing to talk about. Yes, you can talk about health, you can talk about youth and children and gender. But when it comes to waste, gosh, you won't win, you won't get any votes, I think, in elections if you make your political agenda on waste. Maybe times are changing. We need to look at economic incentives, disincentives for waste management, including recycling, the whole structure, because recycling is quite difficult. Many of the people practicing recycling today will tell you it's very hard to sustain recycling because of different challenges that they have. And this is where government can play a big role in ensuring that those kinds of businesses, and now we're asking them to specialize, can be sustained and become profitable over the long term. They can be profitable in the long term, but the initial entry into the market can be quite difficult. Bans, this is what countries have done. Now, this is not a long-term solution. It is not a solution because the problem is not solved with a ban. If you do some quick modeling, you will see the problem of plastics will not solve with a ban, even for the countries that put in the ban. Because at the end of the day, they will have waste that they are not able to deal with because they will not have the technology, like I mentioned before, to deal with contaminants in plastic. How are they going to deal with it? So bans are not necessarily the only solution. They send a very strong message, but they're not the solution. There's restrictions like we've had bans. One of the things I want to say here, the single plastics and the disposable plastics, I think this is something that we can concretely live without. Okay, I tell every government, we can live without single use. They will not add to anything or take anything from our lives. In fact, they will, in the long term, make our lives better. And I think this is something that we can do and governments can do overnight. We have more complex, like I mentioned before, complex problems to deal with. And we need to turn our attention to some of these complex ones. Specifications, and that's very important. I can't emphasize that this evening, that the issue of plastics is not one kind of plastics. There's different types of plastics, and we need to understand what kind of plastics we have and what additives they have in there and whether those additives are toxic or not. Extended producer responsibility is a big area which many countries are exploring now on how to make companies, middle companies take responsibility for their actions. And we can talk for a whole evening on the issue of EPR. Guidance on packaging. And this is a revolution that has to happen in our supermarkets. I'm sorry. Our supermarkets need to start this revolution now. There's just too much packaging. I know we need to meet health standards and we need to meet all the other standards, but there's simply too much packaging. I work hard at home to reduce my plastic, but the amount that I come with from the supermarket is simply, I shake my hand each time. we're trying, but I think we need the supermarkets on board. We need Amazon on board when we order stuff from them. The amount of packaging we get, the amount of wrapping, which is plastics. Knowledge management and information sharing is fundamental because, as I mentioned before, not all countries have the same levels of development, same access to information. So information sharing on the types of plastics, different uses of the plastics, what they're used for, is very important because the tendency is, like I said before, we recycle, we put all the plastics together and make it into a flower pot, not knowing that in this flower pot there could be toxic plastics as well. Green customs. I put green customs here because I think it's an important area where we seem to forget. This customs officer, guys, is not a chemist. He's not a mechanical engineer. He just, knows how to register things in the document. I'm not demeaning them. They are very important. But we cannot expect them to know different types of labels, different types of plastics, different types of everything. We need to train them. We need to have systems that support them. They have a very big responsibility because they control what comes into our country and what goes out of our country. And if we don't have robust customs system and we don't invest in training them, in helping them, in giving them the right tools, then whatever we decide and we do at the national level or international level, it won't work. It won't work. We've seen that in the case of illegal trade in biodiversity like ivory and all this, because if the customs don't know, how are they going to be able to stop it? How are they going to be able to help us and regulate the whole thing? So customs are for me very, very critical in that respect, and sometimes we forget about them. Capacity building, fundamental, and these are national priorities. I think that should come in, and of course we've been discussing for a long while about circular economy. We think it's going to be something that happens on its own. It needs appropriate legislation. We need appropriate legislation to promote circular economy. We need policies to promote circular economy, incentives to promote circular economy. So again, coming back to the question, so now I've reversed everything. So I've kind of siloed all the topics, chemistry, oceans, the earth, legal, and I've kind of now reversed the whole thing in the last part of my presentation. I've got another 5-10 minutes. Why are we struggling then to solve this issue? And for me, these are the key reasons why we are struggling. Chemical industry procrastination to innovate. It starts in the laboratory. I was in a recent meeting. How many university courses today in chemistry? I'm a biochemist. I didn't do a course on sustainable chemistry, which means that the products that I'm producing, what's going to happen to it in the environment? There's health screening, yes, because the product has to be safe for health. But in terms of the environment, is it recyclable? What are the processes for recycling it? We need to bring it into our education institutions. We need to talk to the chemists because they are the designers of these basic products. And they need to understand the bigger picture, not only the conical flask and the tube, the test tubes. They need to know about our oceans, about the environment. They need to go beyond so that in return they can design products that can be recycled, design products that can be better even. So we need this kind of transformation in the chemical industry. Consumers disconnected to the planet's real health, and I mentioned the media's role. We in the article in the newsletter of the alumni of the university, I say we are totally disconnected because we wake up, we consume, we put the waste in the bin in the kitchen, then we take the waste from the kitchen and we put it outside. That's it. We don't even ask where does it go. Who's ever asked? Who's ever went down to the municipality and said, where does my waste go? I want to know today, where does my waste go? Nobody does that, all right? But you want to know where your money goes. You want to know where you sit every month. Money I'm spending on this. But waste is not something that we just totally ignore in our whole thought processes. We never take accountability for where our waste goes or how much waste we are generating and whether next month we want to generate 1 kilo less. We never do these metrics. And that is something that is important. And that has to change if we're going to make progress. We live in a world of 19th century economics, unfortunately. The real cost of our footprint, and let's call it our footprint, is not really factored in everything that we do. And as a result, we don't know the true cost to our planet of the products that we consume, of the things that we consume, because we're still stuck in 18th century economics. We are wired to react rather than proact. Plastics accumulating in the ocean, we do something, we're going to clean it up. What happened with preventing it there in the first place? So we are wired. And again, I'm going back to our education institutions, and it's something that is very close to my heart, education. How do we bring up those kids in our schools until they get to university in thinking about our planet, in thinking about the impact they would have on our planet, and about reacting to these, proacting to these rather than reacting to those challenges that we have. In effective treaties, we have a lot of treaties, and here I'm open to criticism. Even the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions have not been effective in doing its work because of our challenges, because of this lack of conviction in solving the problem. And of course, poor implementation of national laws. Some countries have wonderful laws, but are we implementing them? Are they enforced? Are they monitored? Are we learning what works and what doesn't work, and then amending them to be able to work more effectively? Political will. I mentioned that at the start of my lecture. Politicians are scared to put in place, laws that decrease plastics and whatnot. They're scared because they feel the people will be unhappy. And probably they are right, but we need to fix. We need to fix this kind of, the fear, because the people need to understand that this is not a pathway that is not even profitable to us, but profitable to our planet as well. Cultural adoption, social-cultural awareness issues. I was sitting in a conference, and I come from Africa. Seychelles is part of Africa, so I can say what I want to say about Africa this evening. He said, in my country, the people are so poor, they need plastic bags to go and buy their meat and everything. Now, 30 years ago in Africa, we still had meat. We didn't have plastic bags. We had our banana leaves. We had bags made out of sisal. These were organic bags. And today, we reintroduce this, we create new jobs, we create new industries. Those industries died. In my country, we made bags out of vacua, which is a plant. And like 10 years ago, I gave each one of the parliamentarians in Seychelles one of these bags because I wanted to send a message that they are the leaders in society. And if people see them walking around with one, with all their papers and whatever going to the National Assembly or to Parliament, then others will say, this is fashionable. This is very, my politician is walking around with a nice bag. But the industry is gone. If I go to my country and ask how many people are making those bags anymore, it's gone. So we lived without bags before. We had meat, we had everything else. So we need to change again the kind of mindset that we think we can live. We can't live without plastic. Sorry, the other way. Modern day products and value chains are complex. It's incredibly complex because we've reached a level of development in our society that we are designing things that mix people's needs, You want now, when you walk in the rain, you don't want the rain to penetrate your jacket. You want to wake up in the morning, you don't want to iron your shirt. You want to have an iron-free shirt, right? When you want to fry an egg, you don't want it to stick to the pan, right? Because you don't want to wash the pan. You want it to slide. So industry notes all these needs, and they throw us these products. But some of these products, like Teflon, for example, the chemical is now, banned in the Stockholm Convention, but it was found to be cancer-causing, right? And now there's new pans coming in. But I'm just giving you examples on how we as a society have created such complex products to meet our needs and expectations. And for me, that brings the challenge. So the search for solutions. And if you look at this wave here, I found this on the web and just wanted to share with you 3,000 years before, before Christ, we used to dump everything. Then we had landfill, we found a place, then we looked at composting, and so now we're probably going beyond the sixth wave where we're looking at zero waste, changing behavior, sustainable consumption, cradle to cradle design. All these are new concepts that we are dealing with, but just showing you how our thought has evolved. And of course, the big discussion nowadays is turning what we call a linear economy, where we use the product and then we dump it. We're now trying to make it circular, which means that the products that we use can one day come back to us either in the same product or in another product. And there's a lot of work being done by industry. And again, to be fair to industry, there's a lot of research being done in that area to try and see how they can get those products back to us. Because at the end of the day, it's more costly, as you probably know, to mine for gold in the earth. It's more costly because it costs a lot of energy, destruction of the forest and all this, than to actually extract it from a mobile. So companies are looking at how they can extract the materials, which is already, we've spent already so much energy to get it out of the earth, to try and recycle it into new products. So there is a business case. There is an economic rationale for us to do it. And I think the challenge today is trying to see how we can make it work, how we can make this circular process work. And this is some work being done by the circularity people, and they come up with this gap report, seeing how wide the gap is. Again, this is shown in a different way. So we take, make, waste, dispose, and this is what they call the circularity gap. And that you can apply to products, to society, to everything, but it's a massive gap. And this is where the challenge is that we have today with plastics as well. And just to stimulate a bit of the discussion on the issue of circular economy, looking at solutions, and I hope this evening I've helped to inspire you, and I've not provided you with one solution, because there's not one solution to solve this issue. There is a need for an international solution or several international solutions, but definitely national solutions are important, and each country will have to work out what the solutions are. But the end goal has to remain the end goal, right? Is we have to deal with the issue of plastics that is increasing in our oceans, into our food, and this has to enter into a closed loop where we can actually do it. And where we can't do it, then we have to think about removing it completely from our consumption. So in terms of the circular economy, this is also some work. I mean, there's different groups, so it's difficult to assemble all the theories and frameworks that's been pushed by different groups on this issue. But I just felt this resonated closely to what I feel and believe in terms of these key elements of the circular economy. Prioritize resources that we can regenerate. Things that we cannot regenerate, I think we should put it slowly on the back burner. And this is what's happening. I mean, I talk of climate change like hydrocarbons, right? We cannot regenerate those unless you're in a lab, in a very specialized lab where you can produce it under high pressure. But we cannot. So we prioritize regenerative resources. Preserve and extend what's already made. And that is, of course, moving away from become a disposal society to a society that actually cherishes and ensures the long-term use of its products. So moving away from single-use plastics, single-use of different items. Use waste as a resource. Again, change the whole terminology of waste. Change the way we look at waste and see how we can reuse it and use it as a resource. Design for the future. This is a long-term solution. Our designers, our chemists, our engineers have to go back to the drawing table and design for products for the future. And this has to go into our education system as well. Collaborate and create joint value, definitely. We cannot work alone. And as I mentioned before, it's not a solution that we can find in one person or one country alone. Rethink the business model. Move away from this 18th century economics. Doesn't work anymore. In so many aspects, we've seen how this has created the failure, like I showed you in the first photo at the beginning. And of course, digital technology. There's an interesting case study. I didn't have time to put it here. of this guy in Rwanda who's using blockchain to facilitate recycling and tracking of his recycling products. And you can just Google Rwanda blockchain waste, and I think his story will come up. It's a very interesting story. I invite you. And this is increasingly, I think we live in this information age today where if we can put identification in our £5 note, which is made of plastic, I don't think it's impossible for us to be able to track such products. Key enablers, and this for me is fundamental if we want to address the issue of plastics, without going into details of what solutions. These have to be part, in my view, the building blocks for the solution. So if you decide on a solution, you need to have, in my view, those building blocks. Research and development, designers, innovators have to be part of this. Industry, producers, retailers have to be part of that solution. Consumers, important part, and end users have to be an important part of this solution. Global trade instruments and treaties have to be part of this solution, because you cannot have just one country, because the way our world has become globalized, we cannot deal with it as one country. Government has a role. Whether industry likes it or not, government has a role. Yes, it needs to be a balanced role, but it needs to be an effective role as well. Role of secondary material producers. Here I'm talking about the recyclers. The informal sector is also very important, and sometimes we underestimated their role in the whole solution when we're looking at this. And of course, role of markets, exporters, and traders are equally important when we're looking at solutions. So how much time do you have, Linda? Fine, okay. So what are the plastic waste amendments? And I know many of you probably wanted to come and find out more. Now, Basel Convention has a number of annexes, and those annexes regulate which waste should be declared upon shipping to another country. Basically, that's it. So under Annex 2, it lists 2 categories of waste required special consideration, which means that you have to pay attention to those kinds of wastes. The first ones are waste collected from households, because in our household we mix everything together. Since we don't know, because in there you can have a battery, in there you can have a syringe, in there you can have, and the other house maybe they are sorting, so they sort their waste, but not households are equal, which means that a huge amount of household waste are actually then deemed hazardous because they are mixing everything together. And then, of course, residues arising from incineration of hazardous waste of domestic waste as a consequence of not sorting out the waste. Annex 8 lists waste contained in this annex are characterized as hazardous under Article 1 of the Convention. So these are types of waste, specific types of waste which are considered hazardous. Annex 9 lists waste contained in the annex will not be waste, so it's the other part of the waste that are not covered by Article 1 of this convention unless they contain hazardous materials. Again, waste is a complex, let's call it product or resource. So when we start with this kind of definitions, you can imagine how long the parties took to kind of negotiate this text to arrive at what they were. But this is essentially the 3 annexes that were amended under the Basel Convention to better regulate plastic waste, especially the transboundary movement of plastic waste. So this is the translation here of this into plastics. So first, under Annex 2, plastic waste is PWU, including mixtures of such waste, except with the exception of the following. Plastic waste classified as hazardous waste. Second, plastic waste destined for environmental sound management recycling and free from contamination and other types of waste. So already Basel is trying to create the segregation between waste that is contaminated or put together or can contain toxic elements, and then waste which are plastic waste which do not contain those toxic elements. So it's already started to separate those so that we don't end up with the situation that I mentioned before. Thirdly, plastic waste almost exclusively consisting of one non-halogenated polymer. And these are polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, and the list is given under the convention. So there's a number of these kinds of plastics which is given. So we're already now starting to list those plastics by name, identifying them. So in effect, once the amendments enter into force, the governments, the national legislation will need to reflect this and more. Governments can go further, but this will be the required if they do decide to implement those at the national level. And the consequence of this, I will come to that later on. So it also includes resins or condensation product. More work needs to be done in this area. And of course, plastic waste consisting of listed fluorinated polymers. So you can see the level of sophistication and level of detail that the Basel Convention is now entering into. And of course, this has serious implications. One of the first implications is the customs officer. What is a fluorinated polymer? Right, poor guy. Oh, you know. Okay, and of course the other annexes then are trying to fix as well this issue of just having one type of plastic or mixing different types of plastics. So this is the basis for the amendments. So it's starting to really look at how we transport plastic and how we recycle plastic. So what are the expected results and the outcomes of these amendments? And I think this is more interesting from your perspective. So the impact. The impact means that now countries have the responsibility. They cannot just now put all the waste they picked up in your homes and put in a container and ship it to Southeast Asia, for example. They'll have to classify those wastes. Clean waste, waste that doesn't have hazardous materials in there. You get me? Different types of waste, non-fluorinated ones. Okay, so they have to do this in country. And of course, they cannot do it by themselves. So they're going to put it down on the municipalities. And the municipalities cannot do it by themselves. So they're going to put it down on you. Some of it at least. So you can see the knock-on effect of the Basel Convention, which is taken at international level, and the knock-on effect it will have on you as an individual, eventually once they put in the system. So that's how it's going to be. So in a way, that knock-on effect will help us to become much more conscious about the plastics we're generating and how we're going to recycle them and how we're going to close the loop. Secondly, identification and classification of plastics. So we already seen now, we're already segregating the plastics into different types, different categories. More work will need to be done. But essentially, this is the way it's going to go. Because, as I said before, there's different types of plastics and they're not created equal. Thirdly, clarified how plastics should be recycled. And we are currently working on guidance on this to guide countries on how to recycle different types of plastics and how not to mix different types of plastics. And it is ongoing work. But it is very important because recyclers now are saying, what do we do? How do we do it? Recycling of plastics in an environmentally sound manner. Now, you can recycle plastic. You can start a fire in your garden, put all the plastics in there, melt it, and then pour it in a mold. And there you have recycled plastic, right? But that's not an environmentally sound manner to recycle plastic, so you don't do it. Because you'll be smelling in toxics, you'll be contaminating the environment, but you can do it. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's being done in some parts of the world because these people are poor. They haven't got the high-tech equipment, and we're sending our plastics to them, and they're recycling it into different objects. And they are being affected. Their health is being affected. Some of these chemicals are getting into the atmosphere, so we need to fix it. And again, tracing back to the responsibility that we, as countries, as individuals, need to take. Incentivize industry to remove potentially toxic plastics from domestic waste streams. So this is an impact because now we will have to think about this plastic is toxic or has got toxic elements in there. It needs to be treated, specially treated. So that means it is given special consideration. Create a drive for more ecological alternative for plastic. We've seen it now. We have bamboo plates, we have corn straws, all sorts of alternative products coming into the market, which outcomes. So in terms of short term, we're going to have a piling of waste in export countries, definitely, because this is going to have an impact because If you turn up at the port with your container of all the plastics mixed in, the customs agent says, sorry, the rules have changed, the laws have changed, you now got to clean it, sort it, and everything. So again, it will increase the cost of recycling. But then this is where we need to look at how we can incentivize, how we can support recycling industry. There will be new laws, because countries need to put in laws to make this happen. Otherwise, it won't work, right? Recycle companies have to transform their operations. And right now, I understand why they're a bit, frustrated or concerned, because we are pushing them now to become more specialized and even more responsible as well, in a way. Movement of plastic waste will have to be regulated and tracked. So if I'm sending to country B, I have to know how much plastics and what type of plastics I'm sending. And of course, it will pave the way. So we're starting to put in place now the building blocks for a circular economy for plastics. So you cannot have circular economy the other way around, because we're putting the cart before the horse. We need to have those building blocks in place in order to make it work. And because when I'm going to buy the secondary material, the recycled plastic, I need to know, thank you, Mary, I need to know what kind of plastics, where it comes from, what it contains. And if I don't know that, then I cannot make toys, right? Because it might contain toxic plastics. And of course, we've established, which we're launching next Tuesday, a plastic waste partnership. This partnership will be a broad partnership, bringing industry, government, NGOs together so that we can start looking practically at all this. My time has run out. I had a second approach that we need to think about, but this is the bigger picture, not focus on plastics. And this is some work that is done in the United Nations and in other areas. We're trying to decouple consumption and economic growth. Traditionally, traditional economics, again moving away from the 18th century economics, the more you consume, because the more you consume, the more the economy is stimulated, the more spending there is, the more the economy grows. And there's been a lot of work and challenging that kind of idea. I won't spend much time on this because I think I've run out of time. I just wanted to finish by saying we need a new song. And I don't know how many of you remember this song. This was a hit, man, when I was 15. I used to dance this song solo, in disco, everywhere I used to dance this song. And I don't know how many of you remember this song, but this is where we have to go. We have to turn this plastic round into a circular, closed-looped system. And I just wanted to finish with this new song. And thank you all for your attention. Sorry I've been long. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree that was certainly a very challenging and thought-provoking lecture on the impact we're all having on the world. And it certainly makes me, for one, think about how we'd like, or I would like to leave it for generations to come. And let us thank again Dr. Payet for his lecture. I'm delighted that Dr. Payet has agreed to take questions, and to join him, I'm also delighted to welcome, first of all, Adam Donnan. Adam is from the Institute of Environmental Sciences, and he's the organisation's first CEO in its 42-year history. Adam has extensive knowledge of the professional environmental science sector, expert business acumen, and of course a passion for environmental issues. So welcome to Adam. Then Julian Kirby, if I can invite you to come up, Julian. Julian Kirby is lead plastic pollution campaigner from Friends of the Earth. Many of you may have seen him on the BBC discussing the need to end the plastics pollution crisis by phasing out all but the safest and most essential plastics. This discussion was based on a recent study carried out by Friends of the Earth and Bangor University. And we're also joined, last but not least, by Louise Edge. Louise, may I ask you to come up as well? Louise is the Senior Oceans Campaigner for Greenpeace UK, where she's worked for nearly 20 years. During this period, she has led the organisation's European campaigning efforts and worked across a number of other areas, including communications and disarmament. In her current role, she leads the organisation's campaigns and policy work on fishing, marine reserves, whaling and plastics. Thank you, Louise, for joining us. And I think I forgot to give a special clap to Julian when he came in. So I would now like to invite you to ask questions that we will ask the panel to answer or to discuss. So are there any immediate questions? Please. There's a microphone on its way in a second to you. Great, thank you very much. Right.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to the speaker. It was absolutely brilliant presentation. I can't ask you a question on the science, but what I can do is ask something about carrying the public with you, which seemed to be part of the presentation. And it reminds me of what happened in cigarettes and cancer and the way that that was tackled, and safety belts and those issues, where it was a mixture of legislation but also public acceptance in the end of what was being proposed. For example, no smoking areas or safety belts. And if you remember, the way that the government attacked this was firstly to show you the horrific story of what happened if you got cancer, and you saw all the pictures on the adverts of people with cancer problems and the illness and all that sort of thing. And then we went for the rational approach that 90% of people, or whatever the figures are, who smoke are likely to get cancer. So we had both the emotional and then the, if you like, the rational approach. And surely I think the same thing is needed here. We need some kind of public information system whereby people buy into the things that you're proposing this evening, so that when the message gets over, people come, and if there's a pressure group of public opinion building up, not just for we need to get rid of plastics, but the positive steps that can be taken. And I'd like to suggest to you that there should be more emphasis internationally on building communication methods with psychologists and so on, in order that you can get those real messages across. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So who would like to go first on that one? Go on then, Rolf.
Thank you. This has been the most difficult assignment for me, because communicating chemicals and waste is not very easy. And as I mentioned before, you mentioned waste to a person, it switches off automatically because it is not of the concern. And it's challenging. And of course, when you deal with the issue of pollution, most of it is invisible. And we have a great opportunity now because we have a visible impact. And that we can show. We can show it from the guts of seagulls, guts of birds. We saw turtles getting caught in nets. And these are powerful messages. And if it was a chemical, it would have been virtually impossible to try and show. And of course, the link between cancer and some of these chemicals is very debatable. I mean, the research that we have on the human links to those chemicals, and as you know, we've been going around in circles with glyphosate, for example, for a long time now. We're still going around in circles. It's complicated. So this is our unique opportunity, in fact, for us. Plastics is a unique opportunity for us to think about, the issue of chemicals and waste and the impact it's having on the environment. And the situation is far more worse when I start talking about chemicals, but let's stick to plastics for this evening. But it's a very, very important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Go on, Adam.
What's quite interesting about plastic is congruent really with CO2, that on a localized level it's fairly inert. It doesn't really have that much impact. There might be some visual impacts of it being unsightly. But it's not until it's approaching the levels that it's approaching now in the environment does it actually become a really big problem, in the same way that CO2 isn't particularly damaging to human health unless it's very high concentrations. But on an atmospheric level, it really does impact. So those kind of emotional stories are a lot harder to draw, especially because the impacts on human health, as Dr. Payet says, aren't that well established. So I think things like Blue Planet had a big impact, where you can see the very visceral images of turtles with ring pools around their necks. That certainly helps. I don't know whether then that's necessarily the big problem. I think the big problem is actually microplastics, but a bit like air pollution that you can't see. It's quite difficult to actually translate that into meaningful action. So some of those slightly more emotive, impactful images are probably the way to go.
Thank you. Julian, do you want to come in?
Okay, well, just to say that I think that the interesting thing about plastic pollution is it's the same. It's the first time I think, well, that I can think of, that you can actually hold the environmental problem. You can actually hold the issue, and for that reason, as well as the facts that, you know, what we've all seen in Blue Planet and, you know, all those other things, it's really gripped people. And right now we have a bit of a reawakening, and these things go in cycles in terms of you know, public awareness of issues. And at the moment we seem to be on a bit of an uptick for that, which is a very, very good thing. And of course, the longer, you know, each cycle takes us further down a route that in many ways we don't want to go on. We need to get on a different path quite quickly. So I think that the point about how, if part of the question and the point is about how do we communicate around plastics and so on, and mobilise people and pressure governments and corporations, all the rest. Personally, I have a lot of hope that plastic is kind of doing that on its own. You know, already plastic pollution, it's developed a critical mass. What's really key is that we make sure that continues to point in the right direction and doesn't go off down some cul-de-sacs, which maybe we'll come on to in a minute. There are many false solutions out there for plastic, and one of them is that we can just recycle our way out of here. So one thing I'd say about, you know, the circular economy, and talking about the circular economy as the answer, is what's very, very important but often missed in any conversation about the circular economy is the size of the circle. And it's all very good having a circle, but if that circle actually still getting bigger and bigger, then, you know, you've got even more of an issue. So what we have as an opportunity in how we deal with the plastic pollution crisis, which we are in one, is to actually see a real shift in how we structure our economies away from that single use and throwaway model into one that is much more efficient and much more based on reduce and reuse.
Thank you. Louise, do you want to add to that?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. In fact, I agree with all of what's been said. But I think in communication terms, to reiterate, you know, I've worked on many campaigns over the years. Plastic has really captured people's imaginations. And I think, you know, in comparison to climate in the early days, it's because we all relate to plastic. We have it in our everyday lives. It's very much a sort of symbol of human progress. And then we see it very visibly in nature being wrong on a very basic level. So I think we're off to a really good start. People are really engaged. I think there's a lot more stories to be told on health, particularly, impacts of microplastics, which were touched on in the presentation. But, you know, we know they're in water, they're in air, they're in our soil, they're in seafood that we eat. And we know a little bit about what impacts it's having. Certainly in seafood, there's been quite a lot of studies done that show that it can do things like impair feeding. Studies showing that, you know, fish actually preferring plastic over its natural food source. I think a lot more of that is going to be coming through in coming years, and that's only going to add to the pressure for change. But I think on a really, something for me that was actually really inspiring, we have a lot of conversations about, you know, the problem and the solutions. I think there was a really clear solution came through here, which is, you know, it's the challenge to the throwaway society, and that we do actually need to look at getting rid of single-use plastic, because we shouldn't be using a material that's designed to last for a very long time for single-use applications. So focusing on, you know, those new solutions that mean we don't have to use packaging as a for instance.
Yes, thank you. Another question here in the middle.
Hi, thanks everyone. What do you make of the argument that plastic have actually massively helped us as humanity in terms of conserving food, etc., and that if we didn't have plastic, we would have a much higher climate change impact, for example, in terms of food waste, etc. How do you deal with those challenges?
Who's going to go for Julian?
Thank you. I love that question. Plastic is a very, very useful material and has done a lot of good for us. There's no question about that. So, when we at Friends of the Earth and actually other campaigning organisations and others as well talk about the need to reduce how much plastic we're using, and often talk about needing to reduce to essential uses of plastic or hard to replace uses of plastic, what we're talking about there is all the plastics that are actually doing a very good job for us, whether that's in medicine, your blood bags or your prosthetics, or and on I can go there, or in renewable energy, your wind turbines and your solar panels, your electricity, and so on and so forth. And of course, you talk about food packaging and so on as well. There are a lot of uses for plastic that we wouldn't want to do away with, or that we should be very clear, particularly given the amount of heat around the debate around plastic. There are going to be some communities amongst us that are really actually quite scared by that. So people that need to use plastic straws for accessibility reasons, for example, there's a good use for plastic. Let's hold on to that. However, we are also using way too much of it, and we're using it in, if I can put it this way, a very willy-nilly way, where we're not mindful of or even aware of the extent to which we're using it and the extent to which it's escaping into the environment and the extent to which it's harming us potentially. There are massive gaps in the science and the health science. There's a lot that we're still yet to even know how to look at, right down to the smallest microplastics and nanoplastics, all of those areas. So citing the precautionary principle, citing the climate impacts of plastic and plastic production, which are huge, and citing all of the pollution side of it that we can see, citing the fact that plastic production is continuing to go up and up and up, and yet we're already in a crisis situation and we can't recycle our way out of it. All of these things add up to point in the direction of we just need to reduce how much we're using. And the best way to go about that is to think, well, actually, let's turn it on its head. Which bits should we hold on to? Which are the really useful uses? And then the stuff that we've got to keep going, how can we then really contain those uses so that they don't become polluting somehow?
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, really to echo that. Plastic is an absolutely amazing product. I'm going to sound like I'm talking to the plastic industry here, but it's it's waterproof, it's durable, it's lightweight, it can be mixed with lots of things, it's flexible. And all of those qualities about it are also its downfall, because humanity is always like that person you take down the pub and they can't just have 2 pints. They have to keep drinking all night and ruin it for everyone. And that's kind of where we've got to with plastics, that there's just too much of it. And I was very pleased to see the title of the talk was not eliminating plastic, it was pushing back on plastic. And I feel that that's the philosophy really here. We've got to actually see plastic for what it is, which is an absolutely incredible product that has some uses in certain sectors where there is no comparable product that can be used that uses so little water or energy in its productions, or and actually value that product for that. And what does it say about a material that you use it for 5 seconds and then you throw it in the bin and you don't care about where it's going? Shows that you don't really value it. So I think it's too cheap. It's not properly considered by consumers, and instead you should be picking up a plastic bottle with almost wonderment and saying, what a fantastic product. It's probably far better than the glass one if we used it properly. So it's more kind of a conceptual relationship that we have with plastic, which I think is the problem.
Yeah, Rolf?
Thank you. Two very important points here. Basel Convention does not ban plastics or any of the products. It allows the sound management of waste. So in a way, it's been trying to promote this kind of circular approach to the products. And that's why I've refrained from using the word, ban in that context. And I think industry understands that very well. The whole objective there, is when I grew up, I was quite young, and I had a knife in my hand, and this is one lesson I've never forgot. You can use this knife to kill somebody, right? But the knife is not designed to kill somebody, it's designed to cut a piece of bread. So the problem is not with the knife, it's how you're going to use it. And that's a lesson you keep with for the rest of your life. So the problem is not the plastic, it's helped us to really move ahead. I mean, some surgical operations today probably wouldn't be possible without the development of different types of plastics. But I just wanted to point on something important. Look, our glasses specs, they're made from polycarbonate, a type of plastic. I used to change glasses every 3 other months because I climb a tree, I climb a rock, and my glasses were made out of glass. And they used to break. And it was a fortune and a serious issue. But when polycarbonates came along, it was fantastic. I could go anywhere, dive, on the boat, everywhere, do whatever I want. My glasses fell and it's still intact. But the question is, I want to ask when I change my lenses is, what does the optometrist do with my polycarbonate lenses? Does he put it in the bin? You see, and that is something that can be done. I mean, it's already closed loop in a way because I don't put this in the bin. I take it back to the optometrist, you see. One thing that has been bothering me in the last few weeks is I went to my dentist and he's starting to tell me to use these interdental brushes. You've seen it? It's a small piece of plastic with a little plastic. It's bothering me because he tells me I need to use it every night and for my teeth to stop getting caries and, and stuff. I'm concerned about my health, but he's putting me on a wrong path. So I'm still not using it, but it annoys me. So we need to transform, and in these other places, it's not only the disposable, but in the dentistry, in a lot of places, you start sitting down and you see where those little bits of plastics are coming from, and they accumulate to mountains. I don't know how many of you are using this interdental. Thank you.
Louise, do you want to add to that? Or?
I'd just add, it's the focus is single use and querying single use, absolutely at all times. Definitely paying attention when switching about what the impacts of the alternatives are. That absolutely has to be front of mind. But there's this bigger piece which is about, reuse beyond single use that I think is really important. And the measures outlined, where we've got to sort of simplify the plastics, make sure we get rid of the toxic chemicals. These are all key things that have to happen, and they have to happen on a global level.
Thank you. At the back of the front piece, as it were. Yeah.
Yes, hi. For what you've been saying, seems to me, and this is also something I've been thinking about for a long time, that one of the key points should be focusing in education more than in industry, because when you talk to people, and I'm one of these annoying people sometimes that talk to them about, are you aware of how many plastic cups are thrown away every single day? They're like, oh, well, I only use them 2 or 3 times a week. The problem is they don't see the big problem, the whole thing happening. They don't see how much we accumulate. The whole idea of out of sight, out of mind, right? So are there any policies being taken that have to do with education, like in schools, institutes, universities, etc.? Thank you.
Louise, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot happening around plastics within education. And there's actually one of the objectives that's been put forward by government is that single-use plastics are tackled in schools. So there's quite live debates about how you get there that would be really involving the students in working out, wow, at school, how much plastic does it use? What can we get rid of immediately? What do we need to work on? So I think that's really coming through. But on the broader point about, yes, we need education, yes, we need individuals to get involved, but, and it is a big but, it has to be at a legislative level and corporate action where we have change, because we live in a system and we need that system to change, and that can only occur through companies making big pledges and governments and legislation underpinning and driving that. So yes to education, but first yes to companies and legislators sorting this problem out.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in on that one? Rolf?
Education is very close to my heart. Education is a long-term investment. So you cannot use education to change something that is pressing now. So you need to keep education within perspective that plastic is only the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot of other problems, as I mentioned before. That is not even on our radar yet. There's a lot of chemicals out there. There's a lot of issues. It's not on our radar because simply it's not getting the attention it's getting. But once you mainstream the issue of sustainability, the issue of understanding our impacts within our education system, then you're investing in the long term. And usually the turnaround is 20 years, especially in waste. Most of the research done on education in waste is 20 years. And so that's why other actions are needed. But education is a long-term deal.
Anybody else from the panel want to come in on that, or shall we move to the next question? I think there was one, yes, down here.
Thanks. Quick question for Rolph. In the United States, 3D printing is getting very, very big, and I was wondering how toxic those materials are, and also if there are viable alternatives. And then getting back to what Julian said, if you could say more about the size of the circle there, because I'm wondering if there might be an inherent conflict between, on the one hand, saying we're going to get better technology and all these things, and industry innovating, and on the other hand, saying we need to live within our own footprint, whether that's carbon, whether that's food, whether that's water, whether that's waste, instead of thinking that technology is always going to rescue us and we can keep on doing things the way we've always done them without having to sacrifice or change.
Thank you. So first, Rolph, do you want to come back on?
Thank you. I have no idea. I'm discovering every day. I mean, this is something new. I will now go and research it, but I have no idea. And I told you this morning, we were having a discussion with IMO, an open discussion, and suddenly we realized that there are insulating foams in ships and that kind of stuff. So we're discovering things every day. Because simply the whole range of plastics and its applications is so vast.
Thank you. And Julian, on this circle.
Sorry, can you unpack a bit more what's the issue with the circle? So the circle getting bigger is an issue.
That's what you were talking about, but I was wondering, as threading through what most of you have said, on the one hand, we need industry and innovation and technology and policy legislation, and then on the other hand, it's all about the mindset from a consumer's point of view. This has to do with climate change, this has to do with waste, it has to do with all of our market failures, our environmental problems. And I don't know if that was relating to what you were saying, that nobody's asking the circular economy how big the circle is. There is no such thing as a way. We have one planet. And to the comment of someone earlier, that's not visible as it needs to be yet. And it will continue to become more visible. The question is, will that be too little, too late for me? But it's more, can you reconcile sort of a technotopia with an ecotopia? This is often in the conversation about sustainability and potential solutions to climate change and our biggest environmental problems.
Thank you.
Okay. So you might have heard of the expression donut economics. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Has anyone heard of that? Yeah. So the idea that we need to live within a safe environmental space, a limit of what the planet can sustain. So that's the outside of the donut, but the inside of the donut, which if you like is the floor, is social well-being. So we're extracting enough, we're using enough, we're consuming enough to live good quality lives, to eradicate poverty and disease and hunger and such like. So living within that space, and yeah, I think there is a real risk that we talk about all these different tools, and technology is one of those. Growing awareness and such like, in order to become more circular, so we get better at recycling and such like. But the elephant in the room there is, well, actually, as I said, what is the limit to the circle? How much can we consume safely? And as I say, I think the sort of the good news, the opportunity in the crisis, to take the cliche there of plastic pollution is that it kind of, if we deal with it right, then it spurs us to make that change away from the single-use model and towards not just a recycling, but more of a reuse model. But it doesn't of itself take us the whole way there. There's still a bit of a leap of awareness that we need to make, which I think is what you're touching on. And I think this is where the question about education comes in. It's where the question about legislation, or the points about legislation that Louise was making, that come in. We need to have a properly evidence-based approach to dealing with all our environmental and social problems, rather than just trying to react, some of them in a better informed way than others, but all of them to some extent a little bit knee-jerk. And this is where, for plastic pollution, we need to work out how to reduce plastic pollution in a way that doesn't just create another environmental problem because we switched a whole load of other materials. That doesn't just look at single-use plastics, as important as that is, it's all come up, but forget about how much plastic pollution comes from our car tyres, or from the soles of our feet, or our carpets, and all the rest of it. And I think that if and when we sit down and we properly look at it in that frame, looking at all of the different elements of this, then what inevitably that points towards is it isn't actually just plastic that's the problem, it's the model, it's the economic model. And being circular isn't even the whole of the answer there. It's reducing how much we're getting through, altogether. So reducing that circle, doing proper donut economics. I don't know if that answers your question better, but sort of.
Louise, do you want to add to that?
I'd agree with all that, but it actually makes me think of a fact, which is quite a kind of mind bomb fact for me, that wasn't in the presentation. We did see the amount to which plastic use has increased, this curve. What wasn't in there is that if we continue with business as usual, which we appear to be largely globally, we're going to see a quadrupling of the amount of plastic we produce by 2050. So that, I think, is a key factor hold in mind when we're having this discussion about, how exactly do we deal with plastic, which is why we focus so much on the need for a reduction, and that recycling cannot fix this problem. It's just not, you saw the 9% figure, 9% of all the plastic ever produced has actually been recycled. That is a fact. And you put those two facts together and it's clear that we have to reduce. Yeah.
Adam?
One thing I'd add.
Yeah, it's interesting. An interesting ponderable, I guess, is that I was just noting down there, listening to Louise talking, is whether plastic has created modern lifestyles, or whether modern lifestyles have kind of created the abundance of plastic. And I think about my own life. I have a young child, I have a dog, I have a full-time job, and even being ecologically aware and quite concerned about my plastic use, inevitably I use huge amounts of plastic. There'll be times where I buy lunch from a high street store and you kind of look in horror after having eaten your 3 leaves and with a sauce and a couple of crispy onions on there about the plastic that you've just produced from eating so little. But the question is, if plastic didn't exist, would we have that kind of busy lifestyle of eating on the go? So there's a chicken and egg question there. I don't know whether it's a ponderable for a reason, because I can't see which causes, where's the causation.
Rolf, I'm going to ask you to have the last word here, because I'm afraid...
Yes, 2 things. The issue of technology, I think, is very, very important. Again, technology is a tool. You can use it for bad, you can use it for good. I mean, we've seen technology even in my own personal adoption of energy conservation, for example. Without technology, monitoring my temperatures, production of my solar panels, production of my heating, I won't be able to fine-tune my energy consumption at home. And I've seen reductions of nearly 70%. So technology helps us to make better decisions. And when we use it that way, then it can help us to really achieve certain level of sustainability which we would not have been able to achieve. So the metrics generated by technology and being able to manage by technology can really help us. So again, it can be used for good, but it can also be used for bad. But I think technology has an important role to play in addressing the challenges that we have before us. I've talked about tracking, traceability, and all this. And technology will have an important role to play. Coming back to our discussion on the circular and the bigger circle, definitely, recycling is not the only answer. And I couldn't go into my second part of my slide, which is my other model, is decoupling, which I talked about, decoupling consumption from economic growth, because the premise is, you are a well-performing country if your economy is growing, and you are underperforming country if your economy is not growing, So we have this metric in economics which really kind of sends everything, all over the place. So that also needs to be looked at, and this is the bigger picture. It's our consumption and how it's linked to our economy, and I think we need to change the metrics there as well. So it is really definitely about reduction, definitely about reusing, recovery. It's all the 7 hours, right? If to summarize the answer.
I'm going to have to stop us there. I know there are lots of people who had questions they haven't had a chance to ask. I'm sorry, time has come to an end, but a huge thank you. I'm sure you want to join with me in thanking Rolf, Adam, Julian and Louise. And can I add that I'd like to thank you for being a fantastic audience. Thank you all very much, and thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you.